All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks first very much for coming out. It's great to have people back again. Wow, so awesome. So we're starting tonight. This is the Ethics in the Modern World series, and I actually started this online earlier, but just to recap a little bit what we're doing is I want to explore the ethical confusions that we have, which I think are legion, and that explain many of the difficulties that we face in the modern world, which are not really material problems, but ethical problems. So we'll talk about that. Tonight's lecture is Taoism and the Ethics of Nature, and we'll be exploring the themes of our relationship to nature, which were immense, but we'll just choose a few sections. Before I start on that, though, I'm doing another class in my garden, August 31st, 1st, and 2nd. I just did one in France, which was amazing. So that was fun, and I did one in Curacao, which was also incredible. So I want to thank everybody who took the classes in France and Curacao, but I'm going to do one more this year in the garden, August 31st, 1st, and 2nd. So that was amazing. So the idea of the series is that, so we have the distinction between ethics and morals. Now these are often intermixed. Ethos comes from the Greek, moralis comes from the Latin. This is not a clear distinction. There's definitely overlap in their uses. But in general, ethos refers to a way of living, the way you go about doing things, as related to sort of your own sense of what's correct, incorrect, healthy, to your own goals. Morals tends to be the same idea, but in relation to an accepted set of social standards and codes. So morals tends to be, am I breaking the law? Am I meeting the rules? Am I meeting expectations that come from external sources? Ethos, am I living a life that relates to how I ponder it? This is why one of the Greek concepts of an unexamined life is not worth living, because if you don't examine your life, you don't know how to live. With morals, this is not a problem in theory, because you know how to live because you have the rules are already written. You don't need to examine your life, right? So that's that exaggerates the distinction between the two, but that's one way to keep them clear. And so Taoism and the ethics of nature, right. So the University of California at Santa Barbara was recently offered by a billionaire to build a dorm. Now this is great because like most universities, they're desperately short on housing. And this billionaire said, and better yet, I'm going to design it myself. So that's great. So the plan he came up with is essentially a huge box. And he wants to put about 4,400 students in there. And some of the neat features are no windows and no natural ventilation. So it turns out that if people don't need light and they don't need air, you can build these buildings much more efficiently, right? And also, all the rooms or most of the rooms are solo rooms. You don't have to have a roommate. You don't have to share your space with other people. So you can just use you have your own space, and then there's some communal space, but your room is your own. So the plan here is to let's isolate people and put them in spaces with no natural light and no natural air. Everything has to come from a central ventilation system. Now, I love the idea of this because I love the idea of putting 4,000 college students into a place where they're going to recirculate the air. And you can just imagine how spectacular this is going to become as the air becomes polluted with various substances on a regular basis. Now, why on earth would someone suggest this? How could this totally and completely inhuman concept be promoted? If you imagine that people do not need any contact with the natural world, that we are essentially brains in jars, right? And that all we really need is you need space. Okay, here's some space. You need light, so we'll provide electric light. You need air, so we'll put some, sort of ventilated air in that comes, at some point it comes from outside. You're good to go. You have no problems. What struggles could you possibly have in this environment? None whatsoever. Now, this dystopic future is actually our dystopic present, and I think it just highlights how unbelievably far we are from understanding what humans need in relationship to nature. We've come to think of ourselves as not natural. And while this sort of crazy dorm room sounds unreal, but it's true, you can look this up. Like one of the architecture professors resigned from the university. He said, this is so inhuman. Also, by the way, it doesn't meet a single code. So like there's no way, like, so it's just this crazy. But if you think of like all the science fiction shows, like, and movies, like, I don't know, even like an old one like Star Trek: The Next Generation or Star Wars or something, like these spaceships, they're not filled with plants, right? They're these totally dead spaces, like this amazing future where we can travel through space, but we can't grow a houseplant, apparently, in our amazing future, right? Like this dream of this completely inorganic, sealed off, perfectly smooth cube or sphere or something that theoretically, like, oh, this would be great, like so clean, so perfect, so also completely and totally inhuman. There's a great novelist, Stanisław Lem, great Polish novelist, and his book Solaris, one of the themes that he raises in this is there's this planet that's discovered that's probably an alien life, and they put a space station out there to study it, and it's a Solaris project. And everybody who goes on the space station basically slowly goes insane for various reasons. And it's exploring lots of themes. But one of the ones that he says, one of the reasons that the scientists that go out there go insane is because they've lost all contact with reality. Because they're on a space station floating in space. They've lost all their grounding. They have no capacity. And what the planet starts doing is giving them pieces of their past. It starts giving them pieces of their reality. And the planet starts forming like little gardens and little lands. And they're just like freaking out because they're like, oh, they can't tell what's real anymore. They can't tell what's fake anymore. And Lim talks about this. It seems like an exaggeration, but again, you have a dorm being proposed to be built that's put 4,400 students into solitary confinement with no natural light or air. So not that far of an exaggeration, right? But Lim says, and here's a quote from his Summa Technologia, that is because even if we ourselves choose the end point, our way of getting there is chosen by nature. We can fly, but not by flapping our arms. We can walk on water, but not in the way it is depicted in the Bible. Perhaps we will eventually gain a kind of longevity that will practically amount to immortality, but to do this, we will have to give up on the bodily form that nature gave us. Perhaps, thanks to hibernation, we will be able to travel freely across millions of years, but those who wake up after their glacial dream will find themselves in an unfamiliar world, since the world and the culture that have shaped them will have disappeared during their reversible death. Thus, when fulfilling our dreams, the material world requires us to undertake actions. This is the idea. We can dream, but we're still shaped by nature. And we continually forget this. That's why I say Taoism and the ethics of nature, because Taoism, if it has any central point, which is arguable, certainly one of them is nature. Look to nature in all things. And there's just a great quote from the Tao Te Ching: man is ruled by earth, earth is ruled by heaven, heaven is ruled by the way is ruled by itself. And in this concept, the way is like a gravity. It's just literally the way things are. It's not a moral judgment. It's not an ideal. It just is. And the isness of things is found in nature. That's where you look for it. Related to this concept is the idea that the way, the Tao, is nameless. When you name things, you get confused. That's the 10,000. Naming gives you birth of the 10,000 things, which is to say, the confusion. And so what Taoism says, and this is the ethos of Taoism, is that if you want to know things, you have to look to nature. You have no choice. You must do this. Of course, we never do this. In fact, we almost invariably in our modern society refuse to pay attention to natural systems ourselves, how we relate to natural systems. And by the way, in this sense of the use of the word nature, definitions, of course, very broad, you can argue about all this, but basically is we are natural, and it's the our interface with the material world, particularly the non-man-made material world, that will give us all kinds of lessons, but those lessons will not be named lessons. These are not lessons with words. These are lessons that come to us without names, without the abstraction. It's the concrete we need. Notice this is what Lim says. We can fly, but not how we want. We can walk on water, but not how we want. There's going to be a concrete material stricture on that. And that the more we can interact with that concrete material stricture, the more we can bring ourselves into contact with that, the greater our sense of the reality of the world and understanding of the world will be. It doesn't make the world right or wrong. Taoism is not interested in that. It just makes the world real. And this is what I think one of our core struggles. I always imagine, I've talked about this before, that in the average day, if you're working, particularly working remotely, but even if you're in an office, if you get up, look at your phone, work on your computer, go to an office, work on a computer, get back in your car, get home, watch a TV screen, or work on your computer, or look at a phone screen, and then go to sleep, you've just gone through a day, and almost everything that you've encountered has been mediated symbols. You've not been encountering the real. I mean, sort of vaguely real, but not the real, not the real that you can feel, that's soft or warm or hard or sharp or cuts you and you bleed or you taste it and it tastes lovely. And what Taoism argued, and this is amazing, many thousands of years ago, was that if you spend too much time with abstractions, they were worried about the abstractions of words, the 10,000 things, you become baffled, self-baffling. You're confused about what's going on, and you will feel ungrounded in the world. You'll feel lost. You'll feel anxiety. Which is terrifying to think that they said that, a few thousand years ago, relative to the fact that they were very nervous about language. I'm like, man, wow, if they could just live today and see all the abstractions, all the symbol systems, see how much space we've been able to put between ourselves and the felt and the experienced, the things that you know that are beyond language. That language is only a very poor mediator and in some way a limiter of those experiences, which we all know. We have experiences. You taste something, you're like, oh, somebody says, it's so great, what does it taste like? And all of a sudden, if you say anything, you know it's somewhat wrong, and it's going to take a very big experience and shrink it small, right? If somebody says, why do you like someone? You're like, oh, right? If you really like someone, doesn't any description of why you like them feel like you're sort of cheating them? Right? Because you're making them a little smaller than they feel in your heart. Because there's no way to really catch the essence of a person in the 10,000 words. It's the nameless experience of them that brings them to life. And so what we've done systematically as a culture is said, forget that, no way, we want no contact with that. And I've mentioned this before because it drives me insane, but there's lawsuits all over the United States, I hope other countries are not doing this, where parents are suing school districts because their children are not getting enough recess time. They're being forced to sit still in their desks for too long. The lawsuit in Washington State turned out that students were getting less than 20 minutes a day of recess time in elementary school. Right? Talk about being abstracted from both your nature, which is young, I want to move around, I have energy, and nature around you, I want to interact with other people, I want to feel them, I want to hear them, I want to touch them. And my environment, I want to be on the playground. I want to grab some paint and smear it on something. I want to throw a dodgeball at some kid and hit him and make him bleed, and I feel bad, and they cry, and it's all great, right? This is the encounter with nature, which is in some essence always ineffable, meaning not capable of being expressed in language. And when we've grown so used to, so indoctrinated into a culture where anything that cannot be described or photographed or expressed abstractly or distributed as digits somehow, we come to think of as less real. It's less real than real. So that musicians are complaining about this now. They have a concert and everybody stands in the concert and records the concert that they're actually fucking attending. This makes no sense, right? But they do not feel that the concert is real if they can't record it. The actual concert no longer counts as the real concert. It's the concert that is the abstraction of the concert that they actually attended that becomes the real. Why? Because you no longer trust your own experience of nature. Because you've become so abstracted from it that it actually find it off-putting. We don't trust ourselves. Can I judge it right? Am I feeling correctly about it? How do I know that I haven't made a mistake? How do I know I'm responding appropriately? How will I express to anybody else what I've experienced? The idea is, I was at this concert, I want to share the experience with somebody else. I'll give them a video of the concert, as if the video of the concert is the concert, which of course it is not. And so this sort of, we've just taken this so far, like crazy far. And when you look around at society today, and you see just sort of the epidemics of things like anxiety and depression and so on and so forth, it's perfectly clear. This is not even, I don't even think this is debatable. I think this is just a demonstrable scientific fact that a lot of this is simply generated from a lack of a sense of grounding in the world. And the Taoists were perfectly clear. They said this was basically madness. If you do not have a sense of grounding, if you do not have a sense of contact with the natural world, you will become baffled. You will be lost. You will be filled with anxiety. They didn't use the word anxiety, but the descriptions are perfectly clear. This is what they meant. You'll be nervous. You'll be ineffectual. You won't know yourself. You won't understand other people. You won't know what to do. And when you do things, you won't do them in a way that makes you feel fulfilled. I mean, they just give it just chapter and verse. I mean, it's not, and people say it's very esoteric, it's hard to understand. Yeah, some of it's not esoteric at all. Some of it's perfectly damn clear. And, if you read those sections, you're like, oh, this isn't confusing. This is us. And part of the reason we have this so badly, and I couldn't think of a better way of encapsulating this than from a Wallace Stevens poem. It's the second stanza from a poem called Sunday Morning, which it's a lovely, lovely poem. And it begins like reflections in a peignoir on a Sunday morning. But this is the second stanza, and it says, why should she give her bounty to the dead? And this is the narrator. She's pondering basically the death of Christ on Sunday morning. She's at Sunday morning and she's not in church, essentially. She's on the beach. What is divinity if it can come only in silent shadows and in dreams? Shall she not find in comforts of the sun, in pungent fruit and bright green wings, or else in any balm or beauty of the earth, things to be cherished like the thought of heaven? Divinity must live within itself. Passion of rain, or moods in falling snow, grieving in loneliness, or unsubdued elations when the forest blooms, gusty emotions on wet roads on autumn nights, all pleasures and all pains, remembering the bow of summer and the winter branch, these are the measures destined for her soul. Am I supposed to commit myself to an abstraction, an idea, a concept, heaven? I don't know what that is. Hell, damnation, I don't know. There's God. What the fuck is God? I don't know. Or can I believe in the sun, comforts of the warmth of the sun, the pungent fruit on the bough, the balm and beauty of earth? Taoism says yes. Yes. This is where you look. Look to the earth. Look to what you can feel, touch, what you can experience, what you can smell. The whole poem by Wallace Stevens is just a long meditation on this question. All pleasures and all pains, right? Emotions on a wet road, in snow falling, in a winter branch, a summer bough. right? Those are the things that you look for to generate meaning. But our whole system, our entire Christian system says, no, abstraction. There was this thing happened long ago that you can't experience, that you have to have faith in. And you're supposed to believe in it, and then if you do things and think things the right way, then something else that's an abstraction will happen. And so forth and so on. It's all completely abstract, as opposed to the warmth of the sun. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and Taoism would say, man, you've gone so wrong already. Right? Like, that's the 10,000 things. You just confused yourself. If you think the beginning was the Word, man, you are lost. You are doomed. Taoism says, wrong, absolutely on the wrong path. The Tao is the nameless one. It's the thing that's not the words. That's what you should be interested in. That's what you should be focusing on. Not the words. The words are baffling. And this sort of, I think, it achieves its sort of apotheosis in T.S. Eliot, the happy-go-lucky poet of the early 20th century, writer of jaunty ditties and other fun things. In his great, but not uplifting poem, The Wasteland, he says, April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. This is a famous opening of this. April is the cruelest month. Why? Because you feel it. You've moved out of the abstraction into the concrete. And when you start feeling things, what happens? Memory and desire stirring. Dull roots with spring rain. Now your feelings, you're seeing that you start to grow, you start to feel the sun, you start to feel the emotions, you're coming alive. And Eliot says, that's the cruelest thing. It's cruel because in a world of abstraction, in a world where you've been taught to let go of all that, bury all that, forget that, you're a brain in a jar. You're an explorer on a spaceship that has no light and no air and just like fake carpets and nothing on the walls and no plants for some reason. I don't know why. It seems like they could do plants. If you can do warp drive, can't you do plants? I just think you can. Right? You know at least one Starship lower officer was growing dope in his cabin, right? You know he was. He probably got busted and drummed out of the service. But, somebody's growing a plant someplace, aren't they? Please tell me they are. Apparently not. Apparently we're not allowed to do that anymore. That notion, this is what Eliot is talking about. When we've become this extracted, when we've become this separated from the natural world, the physical world, the world of contact, our feelings, our emotions, and our interactions with them and with other people, then we're lost, we're doomed. Later in the poem, and one of the most terrifying things you can ever read, I think, he's crossing London Bridge and he says, people walk by their hands with sighs as the Mary's bells tolled the knell, and then he says, I did not know death had taken so many. The living dead. It's not the dead that he's terrified by. The dead who are alive. I did not know death had taken so many. And then he sees someone he knows. And he screams at him, I know you. I know you. We were at the ships at Mylae, this ancient battle. Of course they weren't. It's just madness. Everything in Eliot is madness. But what he means is we did something. We fought. We were in the mud. We were in the sun. We were alive. What's happened to us? When did we die? When did we become extracted from that? And that extraction that he's talking about is, as you see here, as you see in Stevens, as you see in Taoism, as you see Lim talking about, is precisely this extraction from the natural world. Which brings us around to the ethos of this, right? Which is the way of life of this. And it's this continual question, which in our world is really difficult. this continuing question of going, should I do something that puts me more in contact with the natural world or less in contact with the natural world? And the answer is always less. 100% of the time our culture tells us less. If you don't believe me, look at any, it's just the joke, right? If you go to schools today, colleges today, everybody should be a computer programmer, right? Or something with tech. Less in contact with nature. Should you work with your hands? Should you be a baker, right? Bake things, make beautiful things. No. That is no good. It's better to be in an office and design things that people use to bake, because then you'll make a lot of money. Or it's good to be a president or CEO or director or head of technology for a bakery company. Excellent. Right? That would be good. Baking shit, bad. Right? Because you're getting dirty. Right? Think of how much we distrust the whole notion of let's get dirty. Like I said, I was in France, so I flew to France, which is so inhuman, right? Like being on these planes is unbelievable. They stuff you in a tube, right? They give you just about half the amount of air you think you need to live. And they're like, okay, everybody sit really still for 9 hours. And then to help you pass the time, they give you a tiny screen that plays little stories. And everybody turns the screens on. And I can't bear to watch them, so I don't ever turn the screen on. But now I can see everybody else's screen. So I spend all my time seeing what other people are watching. And it's usually like horrifyingly terrible. But what else are you going to do? I don't really blame them. But the only people who protest are the infants and the little children. And they start screaming and crying and yelling. And everyone goes, oh, keep those kids quiet. And I'm like, one hand, yes, I get it. Yes, this is not helping. But on the other hand, I'm like, no, they're the only ones paying attention. They're the only honest ones in the entire plane. Because everybody else would really like to just go, what the hell are we doing? Open a window. Give us some air. Let us move around. Let's play dodgeball at least, right? Take the seats out and we'll just have fun the whole flight. Do something. Have a dance party. No. Have some drinks, sedate yourself, and everybody just sit. Right? It's like this inhuman tax we pay. And the thing is, sure, okay, it's an inhuman tax you pay. It's 10 hours or whatever it is to do the thing, which is great, and it's worthwhile, maybe not, but maybe. But one hand is people try to tell me, oh, it's not so bad. I'm like, no, that is not true. It's awful. Let's just be perfectly clear. You pay a couple of grand for awful, total and complete misery, which is weird. It's really weird when you think about it, because they charge you. If they weren't charging you, if they were paying you, in some sort of awful scientific experiment, it would at least make sense. But you actually give them money, and then they do this unbelievably unnatural, inhuman thing to you, and the only people who protest are the kids who don't know any better, because they're not confused by the words. See, this is the thing. They know this is screwed. We know it's screwed, but we're like, So okay, so you put up with it for 10 hours. But how much do we have to put up with it? How long? How often? Do we sit in the sun? Do we feel the dough? Do we do something that allows us to feel the real directly, unmediated? This would be the ethos of Taoism. On one hand, it's not confusing, it's not esoteric, it's not subtle. It's very simple and direct. The more you have contact with the natural world in its many manifestations. By the way, this does not just mean go sit on a rock in the woods, although they're fine with that too. But they talk about butchers, they talk about fishermen. In fact, one of the classic images of the Taoist philosopher is someone fishing, often without a hook, right? Because you're fishing, but not for those kinds of fish, right? They talk about people doing with horses. There's all these parables. Chuang Tzu is the guy to look to here because he's such wonderful, beautiful parables. But many of them express similar sentiments, which is, hey, contact nature and then pay attention to it. Meditate on it. Think about it. How do you feel? How do you react? What's easy? What's natural? What's obvious to you when you do that? And I think if most of us have probably had the experience, if not everyone, where you go in the mountains, or you'll go for a sailing trip, or you'll go to a park for a few hours and the sun will be on you, or it'll be a beautiful drizzly day and you'll sit there and you have this sense of clarity, right? This sense of peace and clarity, and you're like, oh, right, I kind of get it. I don't know what it is, but you kind of feel like you're there and you've got it. And then somehow, like 2 days later, it's just gone, right? It is just absolutely like, where did that clarity go? Where did that sense of groundedness? Where did the it thing it just flew off into the land of the nameless things? And that pattern, that experience, Taoism says, yeah, it's a continual process. It's not, you don't go out for 10 minutes and go, okay, I'm good now. It's like, no, you need this continual, if possible, unbroken contact as much as you can with what is natural, unmediated, direct. And as someone who spends an unbelievable amount of time with words, I always feel like slightly baffled by this, right? Because I'm like, I love the words, I love the ideas, I love books, but at some point you have to recognize, or at least I have to recognize, because it's one of my weaknesses, that at some point you're just become self-baffling. Too many words, too many books, too many ideas. You have to keep refreshing yourself and coming back into contact with the world, the natural world as it is. And this seems simple, it seems obvious, but I just ask everybody, look around at the world. How often is this actually true? That we are encouraged, structurally or by design. And another analogy from the trip to France is we were in the Charles de Gaulle airport, which is like, wow, that thing is infinitely large. And there was this garden, finally. We found a garden. We're like, oh, garden, great, let's go out there. It was for the smokers, which is like great, but it was a symmetrical garden, and one side had the door that opened into everybody out there smoking, and because it was Charles de Gaulle Airport, it was a lot of people out there smoking. So we thought, no, we're not going to go out that door. We'll go over to this other door where there is no people. There's apparently the no smoking side, which is great. Locked. You couldn't go out there. The only people who were encouraged to go outside were smokers. It made you want to take up smoking, right? Like, well, if that's the price of being able to go outside. But there were so many people smoking, we're like, yeah, I guess not, right? Like, I guess we aren't going to go outside and it was actually quite a lovely little garden they had built. So it was a beautiful job they had done, but you're only allowed to access it apparently if you're a smoker. And I thought, well, there it is, right? Like, you're just not supposed to go outside. You're not supposed to do that. But look around, again, don't believe me. Look around the patterns that you see, where we're encouraged, what we're encouraged to do, how we're encouraged to spend our time, what sort of spaces we're encouraged to inhabit. The kinds of stories they tell us, like, for instance, by the way, so lovely to have a live audience. Thank you all for coming again. How great is this? People keep trying, Zoom meetings are fine. No, they're not fine. They're evil. Evil, 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 evil. Sometimes evil is necessary, apparently. Great, but let's all just confess that. Why do we have to lie about it? Now, we may not want to be in a meeting with those people, but it's better to be with people. Back to the stupid housing for the students, the dorm. Oh, everybody wants to be in a room by themselves. Maybe, but maybe we're wrong about that. It turns out that it's much healthier for people not to be in a room by themselves. In fact, I don't think I've ever met anybody who went to college and went in the dorms who didn't talk about all the people they were in the dorms with. Like, that was half the experience. For good and ill, it wasn't all good, right? It's all sides. And yet, that's so human, so natural, that the notion of saying, oh no, everyone gets their own room just at the price of having no air and no windows. I'm not making this up. By the way, please look this up. It sounds like I'm making this up for the purposes of a lecture, but I'm not. But that unnaturalness now almost seems attractive. Almost seems like it's a goodish idea. And so this is the idea of thinking about ethics in the modern world, because so many patterns are just given to us, so many structural encouragements are given to us to behave in certain ways, that if you don't reflect and think and act, most importantly, then it's very easy to fall into these traps. In this case, I would say we've definitely fallen very deep into this trap. And what it does is it sort of, besides baffling us, also probably poisons us and makes us ill, which is exactly, again, what Taoism suggested it would do to us. And so when you're pondering this, when you're thinking about these structural issues, when you look around, like I said, and see what is and is not encouraged in the world, keep this in mind. Keep the very simple Taoist principles in mind. Again, very esoteric and confusing in some ways, but in a lot of ways, not that confusing. Like, go outside, listen to the birds, look at the stream, look at the water, look at the rocks. Feel something with your hands, pick something up, touch a person, right? All of these concepts that are very simple, very direct, in no way confusing, are right there at the core of the ethics of Taoism, but very, very far removed from the sensibility that we've acquired in the modern world, because we're told all of these other things are more important, more vital, better. And so last test you can give to anything, I would say, it's a good test. If you have a question, don't know what to do, or worrying about somebody, or somebody says something to you about concept, say, is this just a bunch of abstractions strung together? One of my favorite ones, because Cassie back there, she had this as a question in class, was, are we preparing our students for competition in the global economic environment? Right? Like, what? The global economy, abstraction. Competition, is it a competition? Seems mostly cooperative. And our children are supposed to be prepared. What are you talking about? This is just a bunch of nonsense words strung together that supposedly has meaning. But because of those nonsense words, we do all these weird things to our children, often unnecessary, unhelpful, perhaps downright dangerous. As opposed to, you could ask a very concrete question like, are they healthy? Do they seem happy? Are they enjoying themselves? Do they seem well-adjusted? See, those are more concrete. And if you actually looked at them, spent time with them, felt them, watched them directly, you would know. It wouldn't be confusing. Concrete. Are they prepared to compete in a global economic environment? Who the hell knows? This is an unmeasurable, arbitrary abstraction. There's no way of ever determining whether you've successfully done this. Particularly not for an individual child. I guess you could ask them, have you crushed the Chinese today? I mean, I don't know. What is like, have you invaded Sri Lanka? I don't know what exactly would be the measure, but it's just so bizarre. Right? But when you hear these things or see these things, ask yourself, what is the concrete part of this? What is the part of this I could actually put either my hands on, or I could see directly, or I could feel? Right? I could hear it, or I could see it, or I could taste it, or that I could interact with my direct senses. If you can find that, usually it's much easier to know the truth. That's why when you're in a plane, the babies know the truth. That's why they scream. We're not screaming because we have self-control, which is probably good. But it's not good to lie to ourselves and say that this isn't awful, because it is awful. But so much of our world baffles us this way. We're presented with the awful, told it's great, and we kind of go, ugh. This is what Lim is driving at. This is what Stevens is driving at. This is what Eliot is driving at. And of course, the entire thrust of Taoism is this. Don't baffle yourself. Encounter it directly, and then decide. That's the ethical choice for, I would say, Taoism, and perhaps helpful for us in the modern world. Thank you very much. Yeah.